So there's plenty of water to drink here, so the Puritans decided to stay on the Shawmut Peninsula, but they renamed it Boston. Because they had set sail from Boston, England, and the Puritans weren't very good at naming things. Now that was the last important thing that ever happened here. So for the remainder of the tour, we're just going to sing the theme song to Cheers. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. Do-do-do. And they're always glad you can. Just kidding. Lots of important stuff happened here. I'm going to tell you all about it. Point talk, point talk, point talk. That's what I'm going to do. Order up. That was a test. You passed. Eventually. So, in this glorious city of almost 400 years in age, full of freedom, fun, and first, what could possibly be our first sight of the day on this duck tour? Well, when we make our next turn, look to your left, and you are going to see a parking garage. Now, the guy who designed this building was a man named Paul Rudolph, and believe it or not, they let Paul Rudolph keep designing buildings after this one. Now, his trademark when he would design his brutalist buildings back in the 1960s is he would put lines up and down the concrete on the outside. Said it looked like the fabric corduroy. Called it corduroy concrete. Some people call this the corduroy building. I've never met one of those people, but when I do, I'm going to shake their hands for being so delightfully old-timey. Now, on the left, we're going to go by the Newengland Telephone and Telegraph Company building. Today, it is owned by Verizon, which is still a phone company. And did you know that the telephone was invented here in Boston about 148 years ago by a guy named Alexander Graham Bell? Now, Alexander Graham Bell actually invented the telephone by accident. See, he was not trying to invent the telephone, he was actually trying to come up with a way for deaf people to hear. And he accidentally transmitted sound through some electric wire. And that gave him the idea for the telephone. So he builds the telephones down the street from here in his workshop, sets them up, and then he makes the first telephone call. And Alexander Graham Bell, the first person he called was his assistant, Thomas Watson. And the first thing that was ever said into a telephone was, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Mr. Watson responded with, "New phone, who dis?" Now, coming up on our right, we're going to go by a statue of Edgar Allan Poe, the great horror writer of the 1800s. Edgar Allan Poe was born right here in Boston in 1809. Not right here, not at P.F. Chang's. That wasn't here yet. But there he is, there's Edgar Allan Poe. He's the green guy with the raven flying out of his suitcase. So Poe was born in Boston in 1809, but he did most of his writing in Baltimore, Maryland. And today, Baltimore, Maryland is so associated with Edgar Allan Poe that their professional football team is called the Baltimore Ravens in honor of Edgar Allan Poe and his most famous poem. But Poe grew up in Boston. So if he were alive today, I think he'd be a New England Patriots fan. And he'd hope the Ravens make the playoffs. Nevermore. Yeah, it's a poetry and football joke. Don't get that at the trolley tours. Now when we start moving on our left, we're going to go by the Boston Public Garden. It is the oldest public botanical garden in the United States. It's been here since 1837. Very beautiful park. Well, let's quack at these people as we go by. Ready? Order it. Quack, quack.
Quack.
So we have a park on each side of the street. Boston Common, 1634. The Public Garden, 1837. Two parks separated by 200 years. Why is that? Well, when they made Boston Common in 1634, there was no land to the left of us. Everything to the left used to be part of the Charles River. But in the 1800s, they filled it in. So the land on our left is what is known as landfill. Artificial land. Very beautiful on the inside of this church. Now, I don't know if you've ever been inside this church, but I'm going to guess some of you have actually seen the inside of it. You just don't know it yet. So the inside of this church was actually used for the opening scenes of a movie called The Boondock Saints. Boondock Saints was filmed in here. Now the Boondock Saints is a pretty Boston movie, but the only part of the movie that was filmed in Boston was inside this church. The rest of it was filmed up in Canada. Now in the movie, this is a Catholic church. It's not a Catholic church in real life. They wanted to film in a Catholic church, but if the movie was so violent, the Catholic church said no. Big 10K here to raise money for some local hospitals. And it was organized by the Boston Athletic Association, who also organized the Boston Marathon, the oldest annually run marathon anywhere in the world. Quack out of our system right now. Ready? Order up. Quack, quack. The reason we cannot quack once we're around that corner is we're in a very fancy neighborhood, filled with very fancy people. And fancy people hate whimsy. This neighborhood is called Beacon Hill. It's one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the United States. It's also Boston's first planned neighborhood, where they laid out the streets in advance and built the houses around them. On this corner on the left once stood the cottage of William Blackstone, the first European settler of the Shawmut Peninsula. He lived here for 5 years by himself before the Puritans arrived. In a highly unlikely event, we have to abandon ship, which has never happened in the history of Boston Duck Tours, but if it does, we can simply go over the sides, out the front window, or down the back steps the way we came in, and there is no smoking on the water. I was going to activate the propeller, turn on our navigation lights, shift to the dark gear, sound the horn, and in we go! Woo! Splash! We did it, everyone. We made it. Oh, thank you. We are in the Charles River. We're about now. We're about now. We're about now. Boat now. Boat now. We're about now. You can spend the night there, though. That is the Suffolk County Jail. Great place to spend the night. Great jail. Look at those views. So we are in the Charles River, everyone. This is an 80-mile-long body of fresh water. The river is about 35 feet deep at its deepest point. And most of the Charles River is only about 4 feet deep. The river got its name back in the 1600s. Before that, this was known as the Massachusetts River. That's what the Native Americans called it. They also called themselves the Massachusetts people. It means people of the Great Blue Hill. Now, the river's name got changed in the early 1600s by a guy named Prince Charles. Prince Charles, he named it after himself. Very modest. He would go on to become King Charles I. He's not a very good king. His subjects overthrew him. Chopped his head off. Pretty rough end for King Charles I. Now, every year in the fall, there's a big boat race on this river, a regatta. And what do we call this regatta? The Head of the Charles. I don't know if those two things are connected, but I will tell you two things that are definitely not connected. King Charles and his head. So, we're going to go through this channel here. This is the lock of the old Charles River Dam. This dam separated the river from the harbor in the year 1978 when a new dam was built further downriver. Because the river and the harbor are separated by a dam, it makes the Charles River a very safe, very smooth body of water to have a boat on. You don't have to worry about ocean storms blowing in, or big waves, or strong tides. Very safe, very smooth body of water. Now, up on top of the old dam on our right is the Museum of Science, where we left from today. If you haven't been inside the Museum of Science yet, you gotta go. It's fun for all ages. There's a planetarium, learn about the stars, brand new robot exhibit with actual robots. And my favorite part of the Museum of Science is called the Theater of Electricity, the natural color of the Charles River. Now, this river used to be very, very polluted. Back in the 1960s, it was so dirty, a band called the Standells wrote a song about the Charles River called Dirty Water. Love that dirty water, Boston, my home. That song is about the Charles River. The Standells, Boston was not their home. They're from San Diego, California. That's how dirty this river was. People 3,000 miles away writing songs about it. Now today, the Charles River is very clean. In fact, it's been called the cleanest urban river in the United States. How clean is that? Well, you can rent a kayak. You go kayaking on this river. You fall out of the kayak. It is perfectly safe to swim in this river. Some people go fishing in this river. I don't know if I'd eat those fish. But there are over 20 species of fish that call the Charles River home. Now, it takes the efforts of a lot of organizations to get and keep this river clean. Those organizations include the Environmental Protection Agency, the Charles River Watershed Association, and the Department of Conservation and Recreation. The Department of Conservation and Recreation, they maintain the parks along the river. Clean parks make for a clean river. The Department of Conservation and Recreation also owns all of the land the Museum of Science is built on top of. The Museum of Science leases the land for $1 a year. And they have a 99-year lease on the land. Pretty good deal, you know, about Boston real estate prices. Now, before the museum was built in the 1950s, this was one big public park. The only part of the park that remains is this little section on our left with the green gazebo and the white tent behind it. And that is a very popular spot for weddings. Now, I like to think that everybody that gets married here had their first date at Theater of Electricity, where sparks flew. And they decided to get married at the Museum of Science because they have such great chemistry. Very good. Because that's what you need to make a relationship work. Chemistry. Shared values and goals. Trust. Communication skills.